Investment Committee meeting. Steve, will you take the roll, please?
Of course. Good morning.
Good morning.
For the State Treasurer, Mr. Moore. For the State Controller, Ms. Paquin. Here. Mr. Rosensteel. Here. Ms. Higa. Ms. Yamamoto. Here. Ms. Hendricks.
Here.
For the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ms. Gutierrez.
Here.
And for the Director of Finance, Ms. Juan Hernandez.
Here.
Chairman Keeley, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Item 1 is the approval of the committee agenda. I would welcome an opportunity to approve that.
Move approval.
Moved and properly second without objection. The committee agenda has been approved. The consent items are next. I appreciate a couple of board members have asked that some items be pulled. So we are pulling from the consent. We are pulling from consent action. We're pulling item 3, 5A, and 5C. That's consent action. 3, 5A, and 5C are being pulled, which leaves item 2, item 4, and item 5B to be approved if there's no questions or no other polls. Any other?
Can I just ask a question about it?
Sure.
Without getting us to have to vote on it, I can ask a question.
You need to pull the item. Which item is it?
In item 4.
So
Investment belief statement. I just wanted to ask if it's just the edits from the last conversation. And if that's the case, then I would just keep it in
all
consent.
right. I want to ask Chris.
Does that make sense? Sorry, I didn't.
Are you in?
I'm pushing it, but it's not.
Okay.
Having technical difficulties.
There you go.
Okay, got it. Okay. So my question, Chris, was on item 4, the investment beliefs. Is that just incorporating the edits that we discussed at the last meeting? So it's just kind of a...
Yes. If you remember at the last meeting, we were horrified to find we had some incomplete sentences. This has been reviewed by, I'll consider a grammar expert, and so this was just clarifying to be
Okay.
all right. English.
So then item 2, item 4, and 5B. Any other questions on those? Seeing none, without objections, those items are approved. Which brings us to item 3, which is the Private Equity Board Consultant Contract Extension from Makita Investment Group. That item is being pulled. So we would go to questions from members of the committee that have questions on that. Paul?
Yeah, so I have no concern about extending this contract. My concern is the recommendation. It says that staff recommends the committee extend the contract. So it's my understanding that Makita is the board's consultant, and that one of the responsibilities of Makita's response as the board consultant is to critique the performance or help us evaluate how to work with staff. So it seems inconsistent for staff to recommend who the board's consultant should be, who represents the board in dealing with staff. I don't think this is the way we do it in any other selection. We do a selection. And we have an interview, and then the board decides, and we don't rely on staff to recommend to us who our consultants are. So I have no problem with this, and I don't really think there's anything to do other than to say yes,
right,
except to say this board member is doing so not on the basis of recommendation from staff.
Point well taken, and that error rests with me. I apologize to the committee. The only reason I allowed it to come forward the way it has is I had not heard any negative, I didn't receive any feedback that caused me to pause. Procedurally, it should have been prepared a little differently, and I apologize, Paul.
Yeah, I'll just add, next time I'll put the chair instead. It's the CIO, and I'm just sort of the administrator of your contract. I'm not recommending based on anything the staff feels. It was, as Harry said, more on behalf of the chair recommending the committee. And I want to make sure the public is clear. You guys did interview the private equity consultants, and you're the ones that picked the private equity consultants.
Right.
We had nothing to do with it. My only comment here was you have a choice of a 1-year or a 2-year. And I just thought procedurally, it's up to you, whichever one you want to extend.
So Paul,
They completed their first 3 years.
Thanks, Chris. I should have trusted my intuition when I read the item and said, let's backtrack, and I didn't. Note to self, I again apologize, it's a procedural thing.
No big
Because
deal.
we certainly are not reluctant to make changes when we're not pleased with our consultants, because we
Right.
have over the last few years.
And
So,
I mean,
next time-
acknowledging that we,
Yeah.
initially, it was the board.
You're right.
Did the interviews, made the selection.
Sure.
It's just a clarification.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. So that's item 3. All those in favor of approving item 3, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Item 5A is the California Investment Policy on consent, which was also pulled. I know Paul and Frank both had questions. Paul, you want to go first? 5A?
Sure. So it seems to me that once we have that basically these changes leave us without really a policy. If we make these changes, then within the, it says that then we're left with, within the investment activity of each asset class, if all things are equal, especially in regards to risk, return, and diversification, CalSTRS will give preference to investments focused or based in California. It seems to me that's not really, there's nothing substantive to the policy, and I'm wondering whether we should be either clearer about how we do that we actually do want a policy, because I'm not sure. I guess this is a question for Chris. I mean, do we do that? Do our investments go through that kind of a lens now?
Yes, they have, because of the policy that's been existing. This was an active debate amongst the consultants, and Harvey chimed in as fiduciary counsel. I was reticent to delete a California policy, given that we're California. We've always had a focus, but we don't have a home state bias because of the diversification need. But this was an active debate of Makita and PCA and Harvey about. They all supported the amendments, but then there was a discussion amongst them about whether we even keep this as a policy altogether. Because the state code's state code. Don't need a policy to say you'll follow a state code. And then the question was, do you keep something referencing California? And it really is up to you.
And I'm going to also, so I'll recognize the other members of the committee who are weighed in. I'm also going to ask Alan Emkin from PCA. They have an accompanying comment in the agenda. Do you want to speak now on that, please, Alan, on your letter? Thank you.
I think the attempt is to align the practices of the investment portfolio with the reality of the investment markets. I would argue 10 or 11% of the portfolio is currently invested in California because pretty much that's what it represents in the economy. And the history was that there were suboptimal returns and risk due to the direction. And absent creating a new program with better practices and better objectives, I think changing the policy is consistent with best practices.
Thanks, Alan.
But leaving the policy in.
To the extent there's a law and you need to reference the law, I would defer to counsel on that. But I don't think other than there's a general desire, when all things being equal, to encourage the economic development in the state. I think the staff sees that as part of their job, to the extent all things being equal. That becomes a very difficult choice.
I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure. I didn't see in that an answer to the question I asked. Maybe I just missed it.
Well, maybe I didn't answer it properly. We don't see a need for the policy.
Thank you.
Frank?
Yeah, my question was along the same lines as Paul's. The policy seems to be watered down so much, I don't see a reason to have it. Maybe the board should debate rescinding it. Another question I had was regarding the reporting requirements in the policy. When was the last time a California investment report was generated?
2014.
And was it at the board's request that it hasn't come back since 2014?
No, we changed the assignment of it, and I have to say it got picked up in a recent audit because it just became a very low priority. We found, remember we reviewed the reporting requirements. You were getting too many reports, and that's one of the ones that just due to workload we didn't get to.
The proposed edits or the proposed revisions in the policy, what would be reported if we were to adopt the changes in the policy?
We would have the report on the legislation, whether we're complying with the mortgage cash flow requirement. And then what we envisioned was as needed if there's a desire to have a breakout. California represents about 14 to 15% of the portfolio, most of that public equities. The challenge we find is, I'll pick a company like Apple. It's actually not headquartered in California, but most people think of it domiciled here. So as you're probably aware, very few companies are actually headquartered, incorporated in the state of California. We can get the real estate and that kind of information, but we also found the trouble is that, particularly with infrastructure, you are now piercing through the veil of a portfolio company and getting down, or piercing through the veil of the partnership and getting down to portfolio companies. And that added another layer of complexity, is that we shouldn't be disclosing that kind of closed session information. So,
one more question. Sure. The aspirational goals that are currently in the policy, how close was STRS to meeting that aspirational goal last time the report was generated?
We had exceeded the goal. We started in 2003. By about 2006, we had exceeded that goal. That program is one of the special mandates that you reviewed and changed because it struggled in its performance. Our real estate has been in and out of CRA zones where we can find them and where we can seek them out. That's been the best way that we've been able to map it. Last time that we looked at it, because of the mortgage portfolio and the fixed income mortgage portfolio, we were at above the underserved targets.
In that case, I believe we should probably keep the aspirational language in it as is.
Pardon me, Frank, was it?
I believe we should probably keep the 2% aspirational language in the policy as is.
As it currently is without
Correct.
The proposed
Yeah,
changes?
Don't delete it.
Okay. Alan, do you have a view, and Stephen, do you have a view on that recommendation made by Frank?
No, there's no inconsistency with that. It's aspirational. It's not a mandate.
Stephen?
Agreed.
Okay. Is there any opposition to that on the committee? Okay, seeing none, we can make that amendment to the policy as it's being proposed to keep that 2% aspiration in the policy. Is that correct, Frank?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Seeing no opposition and support both of our consultants, we'll make that amendment here on the dais. We'll turn to, was that all, Frank?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I agree with the aspirational goal, maintaining that in the policy, and I'm just wondering, as far as reporting out, if there's a way not to have to create a separate report, but just in some of the reports that we receive, to look at California investments and maybe not drilling down to the level of portfolio companies and having to disclose that, but it would just be nice to know, so much is invested in rural, underserved areas and maybe by region. If that's not too difficult, is that a difficult thing to pull out?
I hate to say it, it sounds like it shouldn't be, but we found it really, really challenging because we don't, in the data fields, and everything's digital now, in the data fields, we don't necessarily collect that kind of level of geographic data down to zip codes, which is kind of the way the CRA tracks work. And that's why it became a very manual process. It really is every asset class trying to then pierce through to try and figure out where something is located or not. So I understand the desire, and I've had this pressure every fund that I've been at because you want to know what's in the state. But other than the larger properties, it's actually very challenging, particularly in the equity portfolio and the fixed income portfolio, to be able to get down to that level. We've relied on the Secretary of State, we've relied on the Business Roundtable in the state, Chamber of Commerce, and just can't get very good granular data. So we can try and work on that over time, but that's a challenging system problem.
Did you bring up the data to a city or county level?
I don't believe we capture a lot of that granular geographic data in the security fields, even within, and as you know, real estate, private equity infrastructure are challenged when it comes to portfolio management systems. The best ones we have are obviously on the 80% of the portfolio, which is in the public markets. But even there, in the security data, that field literally is challenged with geographic data. It doesn't have a lot of it and doesn't capture a lot of it.
Right, thank you.
I do want to lend my own support, Lynn, for your general comments of maybe getting more visibility as to what the fund is doing in California without putting undue burden on the staff and not doubting what Chris is saying to us. Maybe we can do more. So I've made a note to myself. I'll speak with you a little bit more directly offline and then work with the appropriate staff to see if we can get more visibility as to the impact that our fund is actually having in California, which is the 5th largest economy in the world. I think we can get more visibility than we currently have, maybe not as much as we would like to have. So I'd be happy to work with you and then talk with the appropriate staff, not necessarily our CIO, but how can we get more visibility?
I can just add, as humbly as I can say it, I work for you. We will do whatever you want, but recognize you do want reports on diversity. You do want reports on things about climate change, the Green Report, and I have to say, sometimes those reports get pushed off to where they're just emailed or text to people. So doesn't mean you don't want more reports, but reports do take labor and effort, and so we just need to focus in on which ones are critical and how do we get the data.
Yeah. Sure, of course. Let me get you back in there. There you go.
And thank you. I really appreciate that offer, Harry. And Chris, we know that, your staff works very hard and you're stretched the limit, and other things may be more pressing to report. So, I think our comments were, if it wasn't, depending on the complexity and depending on the type of data that's involved, I think the reporting would be nice to have, but I'm happy to work with you on that.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
Okay, seeing no one else in the queue, that would be item 5A on the consent to be approved with the amendment made by Frank Moore to keep the 2% aspirational goal in the policy. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Thank you. Item 5C is the investment policy and management plan. That item has been pulled, so let's get to questions on item 5C. Sharon?
Yeah, I had a question on INV 56 and under the standard of care section. And the language in the edit included a phrase that I wondered, I just wanted to ask a question about. So I'm on the second paragraph under standard of care.
Thank you.
The last sentence that says the board's duty to provide benefits at a reasonable cost to its members and their beneficiaries shall take precedence over any other duty. This includes any expectations to cure a social injustice or resolve a particular labor issue. And I just wondered if the sentence could end at over any other duty, partly because it seems, I think we've struggled a lot with the ESG conversation, and thankfully today marks the end, I think, of our investment beliefs process, and one of those investment beliefs, number 7, is around the environmental, social, and governance issues. And I recognize the challenges we have in navigating that, but I read the staff comment about to emphasize, that the primary focus is, obviously earning benefits for our fund, but I also feel like it seems to maybe even contradict a little of the ESG policy and investment belief that we adopted. And to me, it seems like the focus really is that our sole duty is to provide benefits over any other duty, period. And then I think our investment belief 7 really focuses and helps us to look at making sure that we're operating with our fiduciary duty when we pursue ESG issues. And so that sentence just seemed,
So let me just
I'm proposing to edit and remove that
Okay,
phrase.
so what I'm understanding, Sharon, is that over any other duty, period, is what you're proposing.
Correct.
And to strike
That last
that
line.
last line. Does council have, I think this would be a legal.
It's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Harvey, your fiduciary counsel and I would really like to take a look at revising that to be more consistent with the statement of the law. And so we'd like to work with investment staff and see if we can revise that consistent with your comments. So thank you very much.
Okay. So does that mean?
So are you saying you want to do that outside of the meeting?
Yes.
And bring this back?
And bring at least that
Okay.
one sentence back.
Okay, having heard that from the council, from our general counsel, I'm going to take a little prerogative. We're going to pull this item. I don't want council weighing in.
Right.
Brian saying, as our general counsel, he wants to speak with our fiduciary counsel to work with staff to bring this back in a tighter version. I'm comfortable with that. We have a very tight agenda. I don't think if we pull this item today, now, it's going to dramatically change anything. But we could wind up 30 minutes into a conversation when we really don't have that much time to get through a full agenda. So,
I have comments on other, if this is coming back.
yep, absolutely,
Other
sure.
parts of this?
Yep,
Okay.
yeah.
First of all, I agree with Sharon's comment, and I think we just can eliminate that entire sentence. So I think you might look at that rather than ending the sentence. Just eliminate it. It's already required by the law, it seems to me. And I think, unfortunately, this kind of, the fact that this is in here kind of demonstrates that we're still struggling with the idea that our ESG policies are not there because we're trying to change the world. Our ESG policies are there because we believe they represent material long-term risks to the portfolio. And we have a policy for looking at those things. Maybe we should start actually implementing the new policy that we adopted recently that has a process for saying if ESG risks are presented to us, here's the policy that we go through and the steps and the procedure. It was adopted at the end of last year. Perhaps we should start using it rather than continuing to argue about this. So I was actually, just to say, I was really surprised and frustrated to find that language in here. But going back to the first page, to INV 55, this is just a typo. Hopefully it's not controversial. First sentence of the second paragraph, the investment committee has established the core tenets in the form. I think it should be tenets, not tenants.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay. And then I know this may not be new language, it just may have been moved around. But if you look at INV 62, there's a performance number 7, perform additional sensitivity analyses to quantify impacts of specific issues. Then A, adjustments to required rate of return. I don't know what a required rate of return is. We have an assumed rate of return. That becomes the rate of return, presumably that if we meet it, we meet our funding goals. But I think required rate of return is a concept that I don't really understand in the context of being investors, unless what it does is it suggests that what we should be doing is adopting a portfolio with a level of risk, whatever that level of risk happens to be, that is necessary to get to our required rate of return. But that's not the way we go about our asset liability study. Our asset liability study and our decision making is to balance risk and return, not to seek a required rate of return. So can somebody explain to me what we mean here by required rate of return?
Chris?
I'll give it a shot, Paul. From what I hear you're saying, the term probably should be actuarial assumed rate. Part of our asset allocation process, as you know, is to at least look at that and then also determine if the assumptions we're using and the sensitivity analysis, where that's going to come out. But you're right, we could change the wording on that any number of ways. I think that was language probably back from the 80s, because from the investment side, it's sort of the actuary set a assumed rate, and that feels very required by the investment side, but it is not.
I understand that. I understand how that's the way it could feel, but
no, we could change that to.
Great, thank you very much.
It's trying to design this is trying to help. And again, part of the challenge with the investment policies is the realization that boards over the decades look at this, and it guides future boards. So we're in essence also writing this for the board in 2020 and 2030. And this is just trying to give the boards and the public an idea of what is your asset allocation process. Because we've gotten so criticized by mass media about assumptions and things. So we can adjust that and change the wording however you want. I can seek, since we have time, we can seek the counsel of two consultants and fix that wording.
Great, thank you.
I'm thinking actuarial assumed rate, but
Thanks, Chris.
we can work on it.
Thanks. Anyone else, comments or questions on this? So I'm going to ask that the item be brought back. The typo on A1 that Paul highlighted for us, thank you, Paul. INV 62, clarification about the required rate of return, greater clarity on what we mean by that. And then I would ask that that last sentence on INV 56, standard of care, second paragraph, that either comes back with it in there with the compelling reason as to why it should be in there, or with it out. And I would ask that I would like to have both consultants give a supporting or opposing of the policy change when it comes back that supports the policy changes, please. Okay? Thank you. So that will come back to us. So it was essentially a first read of policy. That can come back in September. Thank you. Consent item information 6. Anyone have questions on that? Seeing none. Item number 6. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Oh, that's information. Pardon me. Thanks. Item 7 is the fiscal year 2018-19 business plans. That's been pulled, and I've also asked Chris and his team to comment briefly on this 10-year plan, and I've also asked Makita and PCA to briefly comment on the plan itself. It's highlighted, talks quite a bit about relationships. It talks about human capital, the growth of the fund over the next decade, projected growth, the ability to become more efficient, and the importance of partnerships and relationships. But I'd like to hear from our CIO and then PCA and Makita on their view on the 10-year plan, and then we'll take questions and comments from the team, from the committee. Paul?
Thanks, Harry. And I want to probably abuse that privilege of letting us talk about the business plans a little bit, because I want to take, you saw people moving. I want to take the chance to introduce to you what I really consider the unsung heroes of our investment branch. Harry and I like talk sports a lot of times. You'll hear commentators talk about the people in the trenches that don't get their names mentioned as often. And they don't get the chance to come up here and present. But this is literally the backbone of our investment office. The front office, the asset classes aren't going to get anything done or any assets moved around without this team, which is Deborah Smith and April Wilcox's operations team and the ICER team. Just to give you some stats behind them, and I'm going to have them come up here and introduce themselves really quick, right? Yes. Like here, over this way, you scared people. Just to give you an idea of how impressive this group is, this is a survey produced by Cutter Associates of investment organizations around the country. Our operations team processes 9 times the amount of fixed income and equity trades per staff person compared to their peer group. 9 times compared to their peer group. On average, we have 25% fewer people in our operations than our peers do, which is something I need to fix. And the ratio of operations staff to the front office, the asset classes, most of our peers are about 10 people in operations to 13 and a half, 14 in the investment front office. We're actually 10 to 40. So this is a lean, mean fighting machine team. And they really are awesome. And I want to give you the credit because the underlying thing, it's not like I'm trying to run a really lean organization all the time. I mean, I want it lean, but not starving. You get the credit because a big part of the reason we're able to operate so efficiently is in the state system, these people are investment officers. That was not true at CalPERS and it's not true at other organizations. So it allows us to really recruit and compete with top firms around the country. So everyone here is an investment officer. I'm going to have them state their name, their position, and how long they've been with CalSTRS.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning. My name is Matt Schroeder. I've been with CalSTRS for about 10 years, and I oversee the cash team.
My name is Huingo, and I've been with CalSTRS for 3 years, and I'm an investment officer 1.
Hi, my name is Diego Sanchez, investment officer, and I've been here 5 years.
Hi, my name is Justin Bosley. I'm an investment officer, and I've been here about 5 years.
Good morning. My name is Harmony Liu. I've been at CalSTRS for just a little over a month. Hello, my name is Miley Dalpig, and I'm an investment officer, and I've been here for 3 years.
Hi, I'm Ralph Smith, investment officer 2. I've been a little over 2 years.
Good morning. I'm Kelly Chris. I'm an associate portfolio manager. I've been here about 5 years, and I oversee the what we call the data integrity group. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Mami Wong. I'm an investment officer 3. I've been here 8 years.
Good morning. My name is Haitham Sharif. I'm an investment officer 3, and I've been here for 15 years.
Hi, I'm Lilith Arkelian. I'm an investment officer 2, and I've been here for 2 years.
Hello, I'm Michael Lawrence. I'm an investment officer, and I've been here 10 years.
Good morning. I'm Jago Hagan. I'm an investment officer 1. I've been with CalSTRS for 5 years.
Hello, my name is Daniel Tai. I've been investment officer 2 and been here for about 2.5 years.
You guys gotta scoot over this way. You're hiding. Come on, Ron.
Good morning. My name is Ron Liu. I'm an investment officer 3, and I'll be here 2 years next month.
Hi, I'm Pedro Moraes. I'm an investment officer. I've been here for 3 years. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Good morning. My name is Diana Campos, and I'm a staff services analyst, and I've been here for a little bit over a year.
And I'm April Wilcox. I'm your director of operations. I've been here 14 years.
Thank you. And she didn't introduce herself because you know her quite well, but that half of the branch is all under Deborah Smith, your chief operating investment officer. So. Hey, as we jump into the business plans, this used to dominate the July meeting. And I remember before I got here, it took 3 hours. Don't worry, we won't. But we've gotten down to where it's at a glance, so it's each asset class double-sided. I would really encourage you to look at their comments about the challenges permeating the entire business plan. The thing you hear all the time is the word relationship and skills. And those are the two things we really need to exploit. When we looked at the CalSTRS collaborative business model, a key part of our strength is the longevity of the staff, the diversity of our staff, the ability to relate to different business partners and relate to peers. And that takes added skills. So I think as you look through here, and I've met with Melissa Norsha and the HR team, we're going to have more and more pressure on our ability to recruit. The time it takes to recruit, you'll hear from me that we discuss a metric called time to hire, which is something HR tracks very nicely for us. But that time to hire, that ability to recruit that talent is a huge issue for us. The other one that we've spent over a year working on, a year and a half, is procurement, the ability to hire money managers. And that shows up certainly in the public side of the asset classes. And in the private side of the asset classes, we talk about that relationship network, the ability to implement that model. And I think you've heard from me over and over, you're going to see what I consider our succession plan. You're going to see it in live action, just like you saw that mixture of what I consider young faces. I'll talk about our stats in closed session a little bit within the branch, our departure rates and turnover, but the business plans really do have that eye to the future. While it's a one-year business plan, I really want us to think like a business, but we're really trying to look out to 2025 and 2030 and think longer term of how do we operate this branch, what are the things we need from our business partners to get accomplished, and what are the stresses that we have on our system. As Harry said, the very beginning pages, INV, let me flip to it quickly, INV 125, 126. This is a rough roadmap. You can't use it as a hard prediction. We try to make that point. But I think Harry noticed that, we think somewhere out there in 10 years, we could easily be at $400 billion. And we have to think about that and plan about that. The best pitch I can give you about this plan is if you were going to set off and drive across the country, I'm sure some of you would jump in the car and go, but some people might pull out, in the old days, I would get a trip kit from AAA. I'm that old. But nowadays, you'd at least probably hit Google Maps or Waze or something and try and figure out, okay, do I take 80? Do I take 90? Do I take 70? That's what this is. It's a rough map to go across the country. We're going to make course corrections. We're going to have to adjust as we go along the way, and we know that. But at least we know the point that we're heading towards. When we built this building, this is way back in 2006 and 2005 when they asked me, how many floors are you going to need? What are you going to need? We used this map. And here we are over a decade and a half later, and we're accurate within basically 1 year. I thought we'd run out of space in 2018. We're going to last till 2019 by optimizing some conference rooms and things. So this really is a handy tool. You're not approving the budget on 126, but I'm trying to give you a rough idea of the kind of costs that we see. I don't know where the basis points, but we use that as a real important tool because of the cost report to focus in on minimizing our costs and operating more efficiently. We're trying to operate basically at about a 20 to 25% discount to the Dutch funds, the Canadian funds, CalPERS, the sovereign wealth funds that are already bigger than us. So I'm looking at them when they're at 300 and 400 billion, and how do they operate versus how do we operate? With that, I'll turn it back to you. If you have questions, all the asset class directors are ready to come forward and answer anything about their plan.
Before we go to the committee, Stephen, want to comment briefly on the 10-year plan and Makita's view of it? Thank you.
I'll make three broad observations, but first of all, contextually, I think it's a superb document. I think this is a great management tool for you as a board to look out across all the asset classes and identify the important challenges. The first observation I have with it is when you look at the extrapolated costs of running the pension plans investment department over the next decade, the percent of costs that are internal versus external increase over that 10-year period. And from my perspective, that's consistent with what's probably a 20-year trend of internalizing more of the function of investment management and relying less on expensive external managers. So I think that's expected and positive. It's also very consistent with the collaborative model that we've been discussing. Second observation I want to make is nearly without exception, all of your asset classes see significant challenges with achieving their return objectives in the near to intermediate term. And they're right. As we've talked about, most markets are quite expensive today. And when markets are expensive, forward-looking returns are expected to be lower than they normally would be. So for me, it was nice to see realism across your investment department with respect to expectations. The third observation I have is more or less echoing Chris's comments. If you look at the challenges across the asset classes, the most consistent challenge you see is the challenge in recruiting and retaining talented investment people. And so I think as a board, when you look at the truly long-term risks of the plan and the risks of potentially not achieving your long-term return, the things under your control, that has to be at the very top of the list. How do we attract, retain, and motivate talented people to work on our behalf?
Just, I think that's a exclamation point, right? Because there's only human capital, human talent is the most valuable resource we have. And we're constrained by being a public agency. People are well paid here, but in the private sector, in the financial service industries, people can make a lot more money. What we do have control over is the culture, delegated authority, oversight, why people want a purpose, a mission. There's a lot of things we do have control of, so we have to, from my perspective, be continually mindful of the things we do have control over to make this the most attractive place for people to work. So thanks for that, Stephen. Alan?
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. I think the most important thing about the document, it reflects your thinking. This isn't something that the staff did out of whole cloth. The recognition that you care about fees, that you care about structure, that you care about your staff, that you have a set of investment beliefs, that's all incorporated in this policy. At the same time, there's a recognition that there are going to be headwinds and difficulties. Over the next decade, many of the most onerous and mundane parts of this business will be addressed through new technologies. What those new technologies will not replace is critical thinking. And I think the goal of this document is to focus on bringing in the talent necessary to have people who think critically, that can ask really hard questions and solve the issues that they will be facing in what most people believe is going to be a difficult environment in the capital markets. And so we think it is a really strong document. It reflects your concerns, both the big policies and costs, in a clear and stated manner, and we urge you to adopt it.
Thank you, Alan. Lynn?
Thank you. I want to congratulate everybody in the investment office. These plans are always really interesting to look at every year, and I'm always amazed that you're able to condense everything into 2 pages, so it's very helpful. But I had a specific question on private equity, and that question relates to what is one of the bullet points listed in challenges, stating that as the staff and researches and moves toward a more direct investing model, that new skills would have to be either recruited into or perhaps some retraining. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what types of skills this would involve.
Sure. So when you move to direct investing, it's more transactional, and instead of analyzing a partnership, which is more softer skills and trying to evaluate management teams, you're trying to evaluate individual companies. So it's more analytical skills, more quantitative, and ideally people that have, we'd like to get, and we do have some of this in our group already, people that have worked doing this transactional work in the private sector before they come here.
And
so it's more deal focused than partnership focused.
Thank you. And how soon do you think that you need to start changing the skill set? Is this something you need to do immediately or over the next 5 years?
This is something that's ongoing. This is something that's already started. But, you know, a lot of this is the outcome of the collaborative study. But just from the drift of where I think we're going on that, this is something we should probably accelerate, you know, starting over the next 2 or 3 years. We're basically a 90% partnership program right now, which for a program our size, you know, I think it would not be overambitious to say we should go down to 80% partnerships and 20% co-invest. And so, you know, we've been thinking about doubling our co-investment rate, you know, within the next 3 years.
So, Lynn, I think today what we'll hear is relative to your question about the number of staff and the skill sets that we may look to have inside the investment branch in the years ahead to align with the CalSTRS collaborative model, the direction we're talking about wanting to go. Today, we'll start with real estate. We'll have we have a public item, and then we'll have closed session. So we'll hear more in closed session about what real estate's thinking about that. In September, we'll hear from Paul Shantic on infrastructure, and I think Margot comes forward in November. So over the next couple of months, I think we'll get more insight into each asset class, the number of people they think they may need, and the types of skill sets that would be necessary if we are to, you know, move with actions towards more in the CalSTRS collaborative model.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
That's very helpful, thank you. And I also wanted to thank everybody for the approach that you're taking to the collaborative model and making it very transparent. I think that that's been a really good process. So look forward to seeing more of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Paul? Click again. You just click again, Paul.
Huh?
Can you push your button again?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So thank you. This is, I agree. These are really well done and tremendous amount of information, 2 pages per plan. Much appreciate 2 pages rather than 20 pages per plan. So thank you. Chris, I had a question that I didn't understand in the beginning. You were talking on the first 2 pages of this in our background and discussion about comparing our model to others, and you say that means we operate with approximately $900 million per year handicap or drag due to our governance structure. Can you explain that a little bit more, where that $900 million comes from, and are you saying that the earnings at 7% would be we would get $900 million more than we are going to get with our assumed 7% if we didn't have this drag? Or is in other words, is the drag already built into our expected 7%? And where does that drag come from?
Let me answer. I want to make sure I listen properly and answer your question correctly. The $900 million would be in addition to what we earn. It would be costs and more efficiency. We would be able to earn a higher rate of return. Okay. Did I answer that clearly to you?
So explain where that $900 million number comes from.
That is a number. It hasn't been updated in a while, and that's why I say it's an estimation. It was originally from a consulting firm in the Midwest that looked at public pensions in the USA and compared them to endowments and to other types of offices. They neutralized it for the asset allocation differences that tended to be, and concluded that there was a basis point drag due to the business model structure of not being able to operate efficiently, be able to hire and fire quickly, retain asset managers quickly. A different, more, one way to think about it is more of a private sector kind of an operational business model. No one's ever tried to quantify that down. I'm trying to quantify the cost of our procurement process, because we need that before we ever go back to the legislature to change the state rules. Certainly, as you know, the struggles we face operating within the state HR process and the governance you have, the responsibilities you have, but then there are several cases in state government where they don't give you the authority to carry it all out. So it was a holistic view of just the overall operational business model. Sometimes that has gotten people's attention. We've written about it, gosh, every year since about 2003. What I'm looking at there is the cost, the original estimation of the cost to operate, and now at our size, it would equate to almost 900 million of additional profits a year if we were in a different model. And obviously, we can't change it. But someday, I keep saying, someday somewhere in America, some entity will wake up and say, okay, these things need to be operated differently. But it hasn't happened yet.
Okay. Because it seems that what we actually spend most of our time talking about is increasing our administrative expenses by saying we want to increase, bring more, which I completely support, bring more of our investment activity in-house. Also talking about increasing compensation so that we can attract the people that, as we just discussed with respect to private equity. So it sort of seems like what we're actually saying we want to do is we want to actually increase our expenses, but that the purpose of doing so is to operate more efficiently. So is this $900 million, does that count the fees we're paying to outside managers that we might not be able to pay if we brought investment activity in-house?
Let me answer your question in two parts. To the latter part, the end of your question, no, that 900 million would not be reduced or increased by the amount of internal versus external management. It literally has to do with the operational structures of the governmental rules and regulations we and other state plans operate within. Keep in mind, Delaware is the only state that ever privatized its pension plan administration. No one else ever followed it. That was in the 80s. There are some states that operate more independently, but not many. Most of the state plans are still very much like us, an organization operation under the state structure. The first part of your question, I would turn everybody's attention to INV 126. And it's part of a discussion we constantly have that in a way is frustrating. Ashby Monk tried to bring it out for you. So I put line 6 is in yellow. That's what Paul is, I think, partly referring to as our administrative costs, because those are the budget that you approve and you send to the state Department of Finance and then on to the state legislature and the governor signs. The green line down below is our continuous expenses. So you don't approve that budget, it is continuous, but those are clearly expenses to the system. They are both green dollars. One is the state visible, the other it is not. And as you can see, the most current year, it's almost a 10-fold factor. Your budget that you spend is 27 million. The external fees are 242 million. Those are all green dollars, system assets, trust fund assets that we have to expend. What you are looking at doing over time is increasing that yellow line mostly so you can decrease line 7, the external managers line. And the problem we run into is, on one hand, the Department of Finance says, oh, you're increasing your cost. And the answer is no. We are actually decreasing our net costs because we can operate much more efficiently than paying Wall Street. If you look at line 7, it's not just Wall Street, but that's the way to look at it, is that is the external managers. And Paul, the 900 million would encapsulate this entire business plan. It would just be, the numbers would just simply increase. Because the study, and again, I would hope I will appeal to our consulting firms here or anybody in our listening audience, a consulting firm needs to refresh that study and look at that cost differential. It has to be neutralized for asset allocation, and it has to be, it doesn't matter with the internal and external as much as it had to do with the overall business model structure of the entity.
I would think it would be good to look at that because, I mean, this shows here that total expenses are 270 million. But you say that we've got a drag of 900 million per year. So that's, that's more than 3 times our total expenses. So somehow it just doesn't quite, in my mind, pass the smell test.
Fair.
So,
gotcha.
I mean, I think we should take a look at those numbers before we use them again.
Okay.
If I would.
I will do my best to update them.
Thank you.
I think the intent is, as I said, the intent is to draw people's interest.
Absolutely.
And you need more authority.
I'm completely in favor of drawing people's attention, but we got to draw people's attention with numbers that when people are going to review them probably and say, explain to me why this is a number I should take seriously. And so
a better soundbite to people would be if you had more operational effectiveness, instead of 7, you would have a decent chance of getting to 7.5. That's pretty powerful.
That's powerful.
All right, we're gonna move the agenda forward. I think the point's been well made, and if the two of you want to discuss the details of that a little bit further, feel free to do so. But we're going to move the agenda forward. It's a point well made, Paul, and Chris. Thanks for your responsiveness to it. So this is not an action item. It's information. Anybody else have a question on the consent item dealing with the investment business plans for the next 10 years? So we'll adopt those into the record.